Hey everybody, I'm Karsten.
And I'm Brianne, and today we're going to take a look at all 13 potential generals from Theros.
Instead of just discussing what we like and dislike about the new commanders, we're going to suggest directions you could go with them and some card choices. Kick us right off, Healy Odd, God of the Sun.
Everyone's like, oh, Healy Odd sucks, and I was jumping on the Healy Odd hating bandwagon, but Healy Odd just lets you make 2/1 tokens whenever you want. And the fact that they're enchantment creatures really opens up a lot of interesting deck building for him because white has so many cards that interact with enchantments. The good thing about Healy Odd, if you want to use him as a 5/6 beater for 4, because those are good stats last time I checked, there are a lot of cards with triple white in their mana costs, and some of them are very good for any archetype of Healy Odd.
And a lot of those cards you were talking about fit into a lot of the archetypes that we have set up for Healy Odd. And of course, any of the Healy Odd archetypes that we have would be great with an Enchantress sub-theme.
And of course, cards like Serra's Sanctum, Idyllic Tutor, and Lighten Tutor, they're going to be good in any version of the deck because even if you're not heavily committed to enchantments, those are really good cards.
And if you're going with that Enchantress sub-theme, you might as well take it all the way and turn it into an Aura Voltron style deck, where as soon as he becomes a creature, you put all sorts of cool auras on him and just swing with him.
You give him flying, you give him double strike. There are so many good white auras. Yeah, you're going to have to work to make him a creature, but it's not that hard. Play some of those triple white creatures, play some enchantments, any number of things you can do for Healy Odd to turn him into a really vicious beater.
Obviously, thanks to his token production ability, token deck is a great direction you can go with Healy Odd as well. With all of the different anthems, all the different cards that pump your tokens, pump your white creatures, not only will those make Healy Odd into a creature if you want to smash face with him, but it is also going to pump Healy Odd and the rest of your tokens that you're producing, making for a pretty scary army. And finally, Pillow Fort cards come in all shapes and sizes, but mostly in enchantment form. Like we said before, if you're going for this Enchantress sub-theme, why not take it all the way with a Pillow Fort deck? Healy Odd definitely lends himself to something like that as well, and he produces plenty of blockers to keep your Pillow Fort going. Needless to say, plenty of archetypes to go along with Healy Odd. As far as deck building goes, he opens himself to plenty of deck building possibilities.
I mean, he's not the most powerful, but I think he's the most interesting because you actually have to think. But once you start thinking, you realize there are a lot of possible decks with him. Next up, of course, is Thassa, God of the Sea, and she's a 5/5 for 3. Of course, blue is more known for instants and sorceries than for permanents, so you might have to work a little bit to get her devotion to blue, but whether or not she's a creature is going to be pretty irrelevant in some of her decks. But honestly, I think a control deck would not be the best use of Thassa. I think she really lends herself to an aggro deck.
And of course, one of the archetypes that you have in this deck is making dudes that want to connect, and they get some sort of effect out of dealing damage to your opponents.
That works really well if you play Herbident in your deck or if you play Coastal Piracy because you're already working to make your guys connect. So why not draw some cards off of them? Of course, the Cypher cards are good in this deck, because, I mean, you put Stolen Identity on a guy that you know is going to connect.
And taking this archetype a step further, you can get into a mono-blue aggro deck. A mono-blue aggro deck is just going to go all out and beat face.
A lot of the flyers, because blue has so many flyers, it's really good.
Talrand is also pretty good in this deck.
I don't normally think of aggro when I think of blue, but Thassa should be a pretty sweet aggro general. I'd like to see a blue aggro deck.
And of course, in the theme deck department, Thassa is God of the Sea.
Sea monsters!
Exactly, so why doesn't she just command a bunch of sea monsters as well? So you have Stormtide Leviathan in this, you have a lot of the Krakens and Octopi. Play just tons and tons of sea monsters. It's a cool theme deck. It might actually be pretty decent because some of the sea monsters are pretty powerful and just hilariously fun. And what's cool about a lot of those sea monsters is a lot of them have a lot of blue in their mana cost, so they help Thassa get her devotion to blue up pretty quick.
People are going nuts about her, and I think they're trying to take her the wrong direction. They're trying to play a control deck, and she screams, "Play dudes, turn them sideways" to me. Of course, Mono Black just gets to be awesomely powerful. We have Erebos, a commander that can draw cards anytime you want that isn't banned, so that's a plus. Obviously, this guy to me just screams, play Mono Black control.
In Mono Black decks, it's not that hard to get devotion up to 5. In a control deck, you're not going to need him to be a guy. You just need him to draw you cards and keep your opponents from getting life.
Of course, the archetype that's much more interesting with Erebos is using him as a pressure general. Because he keeps your opponents from gaining life, you can do all these things to put incremental damage on your opponents. And in this deck, you might not even want him to be a creature. You want him to stick around and keep people from gaining life. So, very similar to the Sazin deck that we had on the channel. You just keep putting incremental life loss on your opponents.
Erebos can be a very, very effective pressure general. So many pressure decks lose to not being able to keep people from gaining life or keep people from just getting out of range.
And you don't lose steam because you can draw cards whenever you want.
Exactly. And so, Erebos, he's so good. My personal favorite god is Perforos, God of the Forge. And it seems to be everyone else's personal favorite god, because at the point that we've been recording this video, his pre-order price has been the highest. Obviously, you want creatures to enter the battlefield. There's a balls-to-the-wall red aggro deck just waiting to happen. A lot of red decks need to play those artifacts to kind of fill in the color pie where red just doesn't really fill in very well. And so, getting his devotion to red will be difficult if you actually play that more brown-style deck.
Of course, for the archetypes, like Karsten said, we have tokens. I mean, you could play Krenko's Command, and you just dealt 4 damage.
Then you turn them all sideways because you just happen to have Hammer of Perforos on the field, so they all have haste.
And then you can just play generic aggro. There are a lot of really powerful red creatures, like Kargon Dragon Lord, Hero of Oxenbridge. You just play dudes, turn them sideways.
Aggro's not as viable of a strategy in Commander as some other formats, but Perforos really pushes it with his abilities.
Plus, playing aggro versus tokens means you're more likely to actually have Perforos himself be a dude, and he is a 6/5 for 4. And like Erebos, he would make an awesome pressure general.
Well, what's great about Perforos as a pressure general is a lot of pressure generals have trouble getting there. Perforos is a great card to actually get you there. Playing your dudes, any creature that comes in the battlefield is adding to that pressure. So overall, Perforos is a great mono-red general, in my opinion. I'm just a red fan, so I think he's awesome.
The last of the gods, we have Lilia, God of the Hunt. I love her. She's 6/6 for 4. She's green. She gives your dudes trample. I don't know if I really have to tell anyone how to build this deck. We could just tell you play dudes, turn them sideways, but there are some different archetypes that you could do for her. And of course, I think she'd be a really great elf tribal commander. She's not an elf herself, and there are a lot of good elf commanders already, but she gives all your elves trample all the time. So you get some elf lords. We've all played against the elf decks. We know how this works. You're gonna get her as a 6/6 if you have elves on the board.
Another interesting archetype that you can go with is kind of a swarm deck. Lots of dudes, smaller dudes usually, actual creatures, not tokens, not elves, but other smaller dudes that maybe grow over time, or maybe produce more dudes that just put pressure on your opponent. So the cards like Predator Ooze, cards like Scoot Mob, these cards are just coming in pretty early in the game, and they get scary quickly.
And then, of course, you can just 86 the small dudes and just play some tokens. Green is an amazing token-generating color. So you just make a bunch of tokens and turn them sideways. We've all played against token decks. And then you can just play big dudes. Because she gives your creatures trample, I mean, Terastodon's awesome, but he has no evasion whatsoever. Now, he has trample. He's a lot scarier of a body all of a sudden. Like all the other gods, she's good as one of the 99, she's good as the commander, really good aggro general. I kind of want to see a red-green deck that plays Lilia and Perforos, because I feel like they are both really good in aggro decks.
That could be really, really scary. That is it for all 5 gods. Now there are 8 more legendary creatures in this set that we get to talk about. So here we go, starting with Hitoia the Cruel.
There were only like 7 Gorgons in the game before Theros, so this was a much-needed infusion into the Gorgon creature type.
Of course, a great archetype with Hitoia is Control, because Hitoia is a sweeper pretty much whenever you have the mana for her. For you guys who are your kind of spike-ish style commander players, Hitoia is a fantastic control general.
I told Karsten, I said, I can't think of any other archetypes for Hitoia besides Control. Then he pointed out that she'd be a really good Voltron commander because she gets rid of any blockers. And she gets to be a pretty big dude when you make her monstrous. So you make her monstrous, she's bigger, she has Death Touch, so no one wants to block her anyway, and no one has any blockers.
If someone puts a Hitoia down, you better prepare for a pretty mean game. Unless you go for more of the theme deck style of play, which we looked it up. Like I said, there's like 7 Gorgons, and only a few of those are even playable on Mono Black. There's all kinds of cards, though, that make all your creatures Gorgons, like Conspiracy.
Well, there are a lot of other flavorful cards, like Gorgon's Flail. You could play a lot of things to give all of your creatures Death Touch.
I think it'd be really cool to see Hitoia as a theme deck, even though, like I said, she definitely lends herself to being much more of a very mean general.
Next, we have the least mean general in the set, probably, Anthusa Sessitan Hero. Of course, she's a lot more interesting to build a deck for because you actually have to think about it, but she's not that good.
What Enthusa does is she kind of opens it up for a new kind of archetype in green land beats, where green loves to put lands on the battlefield. Why not decide to beat face with all those lands you're putting on the battlefield?
Green land beats has been around for a while, but you're right. There was never a commander that just screamed, turn your lands sideways.
In order for your lands to die, this one has to play like an instant speed wrath, like Rout. So at least the lands turn back into lands at the end of your turn. Kronos, World Eater. Love saying that name. A lot of people have been hating on him, especially on our Facebook page.
Okay, let's be honest. As a commander, he's not the best thing in the world, but he's not terrible.
No, he's not.
And he is really cool. We're thinking about it, and fight is really good. I mean, there's a lot of fight cards in green, and you're probably going to be playing big dudes, and you give Kronos Death Touch. There's so many ways to do that. And so you just have a fight theme in your deck where you give your creatures Death Touch. And Kronos is a pretty cool general from that, because normally green can't remove creatures and you're just turning your creatures sideways. But I think a Kronos deck like that would be a really fun deck to play. And we thought that was about the only thing you could do with Kronos, but then viewer Sandro D messaged us on YouTube and he had a really great idea for Kronos. You play cards to bounce Kronos and flicker him. And there aren't just a whole lot in green, but there are a handful of them, and so you can just constantly reset Kronos, and you've probably got tons of mana. You're green. Who's gonna stop you if your opponents don't have any creatures?
The Bounce Flicker theme allows for other really cool interactions with other creatures that love to bounce and go back and forth in the battlefield, so not just Kronos. So he's not the soul of the world or anything, but
he's cooler. Okay, he is a cooler Hydra.
Than Progenitus, really.
Progenitus can't do anything about flyers. Pretty sure Kronos can eat them. Can Progenitus do that? I think not. Next up we have Anax and Cymede, was also getting a lot of hate on the Facebook page. And at first you think, oh, let's play this as a commander for an aggro deck. And you can still do that. We've kind of found some cards that would help you target Anax and Cymede to make all your other guys really good. You actually want to play other guys, kind of like Tajik. So there's just the Boros Beats. But then, like Healy Odd, an Aura Voltron deck would probably be better, because when you target Anax and Cymede, they get trample. And so you can look up at Healy Odd for some ideas for some of the mono-white auras.
One of the really cool things we found was there are a lot of enchantments that allow you to bounce the enchantment back to your hand. Those few enchantments that we found are really nifty, because you can play that enchantment, you bounce back to your hand, you play it again. So constantly, at the very least, every turn, you'll be able to give your guys +1/+1 and trample.
And Anax and Cymede, if you're playing Art of Voltron, become huge, because they actually get the +1/+1 and trample as well.
So Anax and Cymede, you kind of have to work a little bit to make them good, but I think it's interesting. I think it would make a really interesting red-white beats.
I think the Aura Voltron is actually a good deck.
Next up, we have Daxos of Meletis. I love Daxos. Aikido decks, basically the idea is you steal people's stuff, you use their resources against them. And Daxos obviously already does that because he gets to steal their spells. Of course, the Aikido deck, it can be pretty powerful, but the other deck that I think is really cool with him, and I got really excited about, is a theme deck, which I like to call Honor Among Thieves, where you play cards like Guafa Hazid, all these different thief or rogue cards. And, you know, he's the Han Solo of the group, he's the leader, and you have all these things that steal stuff. I think it'd be a really fun theme deck. I kind of want to build it.
Next up we have simultaneously one of the coolest, most powerful, and lamest commanders in the set. It's all of those at the same time. Metamai the Ageless. Okay, when I say Metamai the Ageless is lame, I mean because he's really, really good, and blue-white control is really, really good. And you just got an extra turn to do more combo stuff, or to set up your board and to stabilize more, so I think he's gonna be up there with Grand Arbiter Augustin IV as being a really, really powerful blue-white control general.
The only thing about him that makes him a little more interesting than Grand Arbiter is that he actually has to deal damage. So you're actually going to have to hit someone for damage with this guy.
So, do I like him? Yeah. But then, of course, leaving aside the combo and the control, Sphinx Tribal, which would still be good, because Sphinxes are really control-ish. Like an excuse to play Dumbledore Sphinx, both Asperias. It'd be a little more interesting of a control deck than just your typical blue-white control.
Yeah, for a general that has a lot of potential and a lot of really interesting things going on with it, Triad of Fates. fate counters are fate counters are fate counters. So you can put the fate counters that Oblivion Stone uses to save permanents, you can put those on anything with Triad of Fates. Other than that, Triad of Fate still has tons of really cool and interesting uses and archetypes you can go with it. One of those is kind of a police deck. There's group hug decks that are out there to make everyone get to have stuff and have a good time and give people life and tokens. And, you know, it's very group huggy. A police deck is kind of like that, but a police deck isn't there to give people stuff. A police deck is there to make sure that no one gets too far ahead of anyone else. So being able to exile creatures with fate counters on them, and you just give the controller 2 cards. You say, oh, you have that huge Elesh Norn. Well, let's go ahead and just exile that, and you take 2 cards for your trouble. That card is too good to have on the battlefield, so get rid of that.
And then, of course, you can just play a black-white blink deck. There are a lot of really good black and white creatures, so you can play a lot of blink and bounce. This deck just screams to have a Revelark combo in it.
And we failed to mention that if worse comes to worse, you can exile your own creatures and draw cards off of them.
And then, of course, you can just play black-white control.
This guy has removal built into him, and this is just scratching the surface with Triad of Fates, I think. I think Triad of Fates has so many other potential uses. I'd love to see what other people come up with for Triad of Fates. I really like it. And last, but certainly not least, is Ty Moret, the Murder King. He wins the award for best name of the set. Well, really quickly, just a side note, I really love the way that they're fitting zombies into this Greek world. The zombies in this Greek world seem to just be people that have come back from the land of the dead.
Yeah.
And so they've
come back from the underworld.
Speaking of zombies, obviously a really cool black-red zombie deck with a really, really cheap, efficient general seems like a must.
Yeah, a general that puts himself back in your hand and lets you fling zombies at people. Oh, I blocked your 2/2 zombie token. Well, I'm going to fling it at you then, so you're still going to take 2 damage.
And of course, also, another great, cheap, black-red general, Lizolda. Having a Lizolda-style aggro deck with Tymaret seems pretty obvious as well.
Yeah, you just play a bunch of little dudes, turn them sideways, fling them at people, bring them back because it's black and you can do that. There are a lot of black creatures that bring themselves back, so you can sacrifice them and do it over and over. It's a lot of smaller dudes, so maybe if you play big multiplayer games or you have a lot of control or sweepers, it wouldn't be as good. And of course, Perforos would be great in this deck.
And that is it for the Generals of Theros.
Let us know if you like our ideas, and if you have some of your own, let us know in the comments section below.
And be sure to check out our Theros set review if you haven't already. I'm Karsten.
And I'm Brianne.
And as always, thanks for watching.